Welcome back to our study of 2 Kings. We are in chapter 16, and we're going to reread verse 12 and take a look at 12 and 13. And when the king was come from Damascus, the king saw the altar, and the king approached to the altar and offered thereon. And he burnt his burnt offering and meat offering, and poured his drink offering, and sprinkled the blood of his peace offerings upon the altar.
Now, if you remember, Ahaz had asked the king of Assyria to come with him and defeat the Assyrians, which he did. And when he went to Damascus, when Ahaz went to Damascus to meet the king of Assyria, he saw this altar, and he liked the altar and decided he would put it in the place of the altar that God had ordained, the brazen altar, a brass altar, copper altar, depending on which translation you're looking at. But anyway, so he gives Uriah the priest this command that on this new altar that you built, I want my burnt offerings and grain offerings and drink offerings offered on this altar, and I want you to sprinkle the blood of the peace offering on this altar. Okay. Now, I think we mentioned this in our last session. This is just simply saying, I'm going to worship God my way, not God's way. Mm-hmm. And that's what so many people do today.
And he brought also the brazen altar which was before the Lord from the forefront of the house, from between the altar and the house of the Lord, and put it on the north side of the altar.
Now, if you remember, God had set out the design of the altar, and really, if you look at the design of the placement of all the furniture, it's in the shape of a cross. Okay, starting there with the brass altar. Okay, so he says, we're going to get this out of the way, and I'm going to put mine there. I'm going to come to God my way. And that's what too many people are trying to do today, not wanting to do it God's way.
And King Ahaz commanded Uriah the priest, saying, Upon the great altar burn the morning burnt offering and the evening meat offering, and the king's burnt sacrifice and his meat offering, with the burnt offering of all the people of the land, and their meat offering, and their drink offerings, and sprinkle upon it all the blood of the burnt offering, and all the blood of the sacrifice, and the brazen altar shall be for me to inquire by.
So, all the offerings that's required, he's saying, I want these on this new altar, not on the original altar, okay? We'll use the original altar for me to inquire of the Lord. I'm going to worship God my way. But when I want to find out things from God, I'll use his altar. Pretty crazy when you think about it, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But we can look at that and talk about how foolish it is, yet we do the same thing today. Mm-hmm. How many people do you know do things God's way? Worshiping God God's way, coming to God God's way. He has it laid out for us, and there's only one way to get to Father God, and that's to Jesus. You can't go in your name. You can't go in the name of a denomination. If you're going to get the attention of the Father, it's going to be because you're there in the name of Jesus. That's the only way to get there. And so how are you going to inquire of God? You're going to have to do it God's way. Well, if you have to do it God's way to get a petition answered, why not do everything else God's way? And his way is following the Spirit, not the flesh. His way is to listen to the Spirit, not the senses. But most people live their life out of the sense realm rather than out of the spirit realm. And then we wonder why we have the problems that we have.
Ahaz didn't realize the sacredness of what God had ordained and what had been set apart, consecrated to God. And people do that today too. As Pete was just saying, I was just thinking, he didn't know God. He was not aware of how holy the Lord, who he is, to know what he had set apart, how holy he is, or he would not have been so flippant to disrespect what God had ordained and set apart and consecrated.
No, I mean, this is a guy that was worshiping golden calves, you understand? Mm-hmm. He's made that as his God. Jeroboam had the calves made, and then he's just following in that same pattern of Jeroboam. And this is what happens to people. People, they worship the God that they fabricate, the God that comes out of their imagination. I was thinking, I think it was this morning, as I got in the car, how people, God, let me put it this way. This is what I was thinking. God, you're the only God that man doesn't make. I want you to think about that. Every other God that's ever worshipped is either made by man's hands or it came out of man's imagination, whether he's worshiping moon, constellation, or whatever. And you think about an idol. What can that idol do for you? Not one thing. You have to do everything for it. You have to carry it and put it in place. You understand? You have to keep it clean. It can't keep you clean. I mean, you think about it. And just thinking about the awesomeness of God, because if you look at how God introduced himself to Moses, when Moses said, "Who shall I say sent me?" He said, "I am." Well, if you look at that word, you look the word "I am" up, he said, Jehovah, self-existent. So God is saying to Moses, tell him that I am the self-existent God. I'm not an idol of Egypt. I'm not an idol of any other country. Nobody made me. Everything around you, I made. You understand? And we've got to get that thing in perspective. You think about who God is, and He made you. I know you had parents, but at the beginning, He put the seed in the first man and the woman, and that seed is being produced, so God indirectly has produced you. You understand?
Yeah.
Just somebody else got you here, but it's God that gives you the Spirit. The breath you breathe, God gives to you. Your mom and daddy can't do that. Okay? And we need to keep these things in perspective and start understanding the awesomeness of God and not trying to fabricate our own way of worshiping God. I mean, you can lay your bulletin out and say how the worship service is going to be. What does the Spirit of God want to do? You know, I could sit here all week and figure out what I want to preach, but what does God want to do? I can get up and give my own little study, my own little thing. And here's the amazing thing about God. He'll do with it all He can. But that doesn't mean that He's put His approval on it. His approval is on what He initiates, not on what I initiate. And we have to learn to worship God in all aspects of our life. Worship, again, is a lifestyle, not an act. It's just the way you live. You adore Him. And if I adore Him, I'll pay attention to Him.
Verse 16, thus did Urijah the priest according to all that King Ahaz commanded.
Now here the priest, he's wimpy. What else can I say? He's wimpy. Here's a man that's supposed to be representing God to the nation, and he wants to please the king, not God. And that's what's going on today. People want ministers, people in a position that's supposed to be representing God, had rather please the people than to please God. And then wonder why we're in the mess we're in.
And King Ahaz cut off the borders of the bases and removed the laver from off them, and took down the sea from off the brazen oxen that were under it, and put it upon a pavement of stones.
So he's taken the things that God had given David a plan for. Solomon had it made. So he's taken all these things to basically bribe the king of Assyria to go against Syria. So he's paying him with the things that's coming out of the house of God, rather than looking to God and depending upon God to be his defense, and God protecting him, God delivering him from the Syrians. He's dependent on man. You see the same thing today.
In the covert for the Sabbath that they had built in the house, in the king's entry without, turned he from the house of the Lord for the king of Assyria.
You know, if you think about this, what he's doing here, he's rearranging everything. Mm-hmm. It's just taking on a whole new different look. I'll guarantee you that if you looked at the church through the eyes of God versus the eyes of man, they would be nothing alike. Mm-hmm. What we praise today and what we hold in high esteem today, God would call disgusting. And see, that's what's going on here. Man would say, oh, this is great, this is great. God says an abomination. It's out of the flesh, it's not out of the spirit. Well, we know Ahaz was a wicked king, don't we? Evil king. So he did his acts. They're written down. They're recorded. They're witness against him. You ever thought about that? It's recorded in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. But more than that, God knows what's documented. So he is buried in the city of David, and then his son succeeds him, Hezekiah. Now you're going to find we go from an ungodly king to a godly king. I like that part better.
Yeah. Good. Chapter 17. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea the son of Elah to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him.
So now we go back. We just talked about the king of Judah. He died. His son has come to the throne. Now we go back to Israel. And then we talk about who's reigning over Israel, Hoshea. And he was bad, not as bad as previous kings, but he was still evil. He was still not following the ways of God. Not listening to the prophets of God.
Verse 3, against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents.
So when the king of Assyria, Shalmaneser, comes up, he basically puts him in subjection. He doesn't remove him from being king, but he becomes a vassal to him, which simply means that now the king of Israel, they're having to pay tribute, an annual tribute every year to Assyria. So they're actually, we would call it oppression. They're under the oppression of the Assyrian at this time. And it gets worse.
And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison.
So Hoshea decides he wants to break out from under this oppression, and so he conspires. He sends messengers to So, the king of Egypt, and he's wanting him to assist him going against Assyria, is what it boils down to get me out from under this. And then so he stops paying the annual tribute to Assyria. And so the king of Assyria puts him in prison.
Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years.
Now I want you to think about this. When the king of Assyria went in, defeated them, and made Hoshea like a vassal to him, the nation, then you're actually entering into an agreement, a covenant with that king. All right, we make this agreement. I'll let you stay. You keep paying the tribute to me, and everything's going to be all right. And then you decide you're going to break the agreement. You breach the contract, or you break the covenant. And so then it gets from bad to worse. Now the king comes in, and he's not only puts Hoshea in prison, but he goes throughout all the land of Israel, and then he lays siege against the capital city, Samaria. And this is a 3-year siege. Now, I know earlier in the teaching we mentioned how a siege was not something just a short period of time, but when a king came to lay siege on another city that he's trying to take, then he's bringing all the substance he needs, and even to the point of building little cities to house his army and feed his army, the families, and all this, while that nation can't, or that city can't come in and out. And so you're basically starving them out. You're cutting their economy off. And so this could take 1 year, 2 years, until they surrender, or until they get to the point that they're too weak to fight you. Then you can go in, tear the gates, walls down, whatever, and take the land. So this siege is 3 years.
Mm-hmm. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan, in the cities of Medes.
So during the 9th year of Hoshea's reign, the king of Syria captured Samaria, and he carried the people of Israel to Assyria, and he placed them in these various cities. This is the last king of Israel. You look at your chart of the kings, you'll find Hoshea was the last one. And God had warned them through the prophets that if they didn't follow him, that they would be dispersed, just like the nations before them were defeated and removed from the land. This is exactly what happened to Israel, just like God told Moses it was going to happen. They were defeated and they were removed from their homeland.
For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel, which they had made.
You know, you think about this, he talks about how God had supernaturally delivered the nation of Israel from Egypt. They'd been a slave to Egypt all those years, and God had delivered them from Pharaoh's reign, and instead of looking to God who had supernaturally, miraculously delivered them and destroyed the Egyptian army, they start following other gods, walk in the ways of these sinful nations that they'd actually driven out of the land. But instead of following God, they follow after their gods that couldn't deliver them. And so you're going to follow a God that can't deliver you instead of following a God who will deliver you. Doesn't make sense, does it?
And the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God, and they built them high places in all their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city.
So they secretly did things against God. In other words, everything wasn't overt. Everything wasn't just blatant. You might think, well, they're worshiping God. They're offering sacrifices. But who are they offering the sacrifices to? They're going to the high place. They're going to the shrines and all this and all their cities and watchtowers. And so are they worshiping God? No, they're not worshiping the true and living God who brought them out of Egypt.
And they set them up images and groves in every high hill and under every green tree.
So note what they're doing in the high place. They're not worshiping God. They're worshiping idols. They're worshiping Asherah. On every high hill, under every green tree. They have their own shrines to other gods. They're worshiping other gods.
And there they burnt incense in all the high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away before them, and wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger.
So they're following the same pattern as the ones that were driven out of the land. Isn't it amazing how history repeats itself? Isn't it amazing how you can see what God has done, and yet you think you have a better idea that it won't happen to you? Well, that was them. We're God's chosen people, so we can do anything we want to. No, you can't. There'll be a consequence, I'll promise you that.
For they served idols whereof the Lord had said unto them, Ye shall not do this thing.
So God sends prophets, one after another, repeatedly warning the nation of Israel and Judah to turn from their evil ways. What's an evil way? If you're not doing it God's way, it's an evil way. It's that simple. Obey the commandments of God. What's the commandments of God? We're not talking about in this day and age, we're not talking about 10 commandments. Jesus says, a new commandment I give you. So what's the commandment of God to the church? Love God and love your neighbor. Now, if you love God and love your neighbor, you're fulfilling the commandments that God gave you. But how many people do that? They say they love God and hate their neighbor. John said, if you hate your neighbor, you can't love God. Right? Mm-hmm. I think I made a song about that.
Mm-hmm. Verse 14. Notwithstanding, they would not hear, but hardened their necks like the neck of their fathers, and did not believe in the Lord their God.
So God sends the prophets, they won't listen to him. Mm-hmm. They rebelled against God like their ancestors had rebelled against God. So they departed from the commandments of God. They wouldn't listen to his warnings. They wouldn't follow the statutes, the covenant. They broke the covenant, the testimony. They disregarded God's warning and became an adulterous nation, and yet they would go by the name of God, but they were an adulterous nation. Let me say something now. Just this coming up on the inside of me. Under the old covenant, they were obligated to follow the law of Moses. The law and the prophets were to be followed, okay? And so you look at the law of Moses, you look at the commandments. Those things are a shadow, not substance. but shadow. A shadow says there is a substance somewhere, right? In other words, if you see you're walking down the sidewalk and before you turn a corner, you see a shadow coming. Well, you know that something is casting that shadow. That shadow is not the substance. But you look at that shadow and it's telling you something's coming. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the law was a shadow. So the commandments are telling you that there's something coming. There's something greater here. And people, you get into the thing, and right now, especially about the Sabbath. And there's all kinds of schools of thoughts and argument over the Sabbath. And yet they're not reading the New Testament. Look at Colossians. It tells you that they were a shadow, not the substance. And so it was the shadow of Jesus. Jesus hadn't come, but the shadow was there. And so you pay attention to the shadow until the substance comes. And when the substance comes, then you put your attention on the substance, not on the shadow. And Jesus is our Sabbath. Now, what was the Sabbath? 6 days God created. God rested on the seventh day. It says that he ceased from his work. So what is the Sabbath? The Sabbath is a rest from your work. Okay? What are we told to do when we get into the new covenant? You now live by faith, not by works. You rest in the finished work of Jesus, so consequently, Jesus is your Sabbath. You rest in Jesus. You're resting in Jesus. You cease from trying to do things to impress God. You're not trying to get the favor of God by what you do. You have the favor of God by being one with Jesus Christ. So you're not following the shadow. You've got your attention on the substance and you're resting in Him. The old covenant didn't have that option. The new covenant, we have that mandate. Just as they were under obligation to follow the written law. Now listen to this. The written law dealt with the physical man. God's law does not deal with the physical man. It deals with the spirit man, and the spirit man controls the physical man. That's why he said, if you're led by the Spirit, you don't fulfill the works of the flesh. Are you with me? And so we have to learn to rest in the fact that Jesus has fulfilled all the commandments. The law and the prophets are fulfilled. Well, if it's fulfilled, why am I trying to fulfill it? It's already done. And he tells you in Hebrews, it's like a garment. Once it's done, you fold it up. There's a new priesthood now. And it didn't come out of Levi. This one came out of Judah. You understand? And so we've got to get this established on the inside of us. Those things were written as an example to us. What was the example of the Sabbath? Rest from your work. Quit trying to impress God. Quit trying to create this and create that, and make this happen, make this happen. You rest in what Jesus has already done. He got the job done. Rest in it. You with me? I just felt like I needed to explain that. It just kept rising up on the inside of me. Jesus is your Sabbath. Rest in Him. Now, if you want to get more to this, then look at Hebrews, the 4th chapter, where it talks about the King James Version uses the word Jesus, but it's actually, Jesus is a transliteration of Joshua or Jehoshua. Transliteration means that you can't say that Hebrew word in Greek, so this is the way you say it in Greek. You know, it's sort of like if your name in Spanish would be different than your name in English, right? George is Jorge, right? Pete is Pedro. Well, you have to keep those things in mind. And so we're not under the old, we're under the new. And if we're under the new and we're led by the Spirit, we're not violating the old. Jesus has fulfilled the new. Jesus in the new has fulfilled the old. So if we're not following Jesus, we're violating this rest. So he says in Hebrews, the 4th chapter, if Joshua had brought them into that rest, then we wouldn't be talking about another rest that is to come. And that rest is dealing with Jesus. Going into the promised land was a shadow. You'll live in houses you didn't build. You'll eat from crops you didn't plant. In other words, you did not work for those things. And so you're going into a land and rest in somebody else's work. Well, that's exactly what we do. When we accept Jesus Christ, we go into a promised land, if you will, and we rest in somebody else's work. We live in a house he builds, and we eat from food that he supplies. You understand? And it's all coming out of the Word and the Spirit. So he is our rest. And so what do? We believe in him. We believe in him enough to where we follow the promptings, that when he speaks, we listen. And he speaks with his word, and so we obey the word of God. Or he speaks by his Spirit, and we listen to the Spirit of God. And the Spirit and the Word will always agree. They're not going to contradict one another. And when you're following the Word and Spirit of God, you're in rest. You're resting. It's not work. It's faith. And faith is not work. But faith has a corresponding action. Because I believe in God, I will demonstrate my belief in God by what I do. That's exactly what Abraham did. Abraham rested in God's integrity enough to where he would leave everything familiar to him. He goes out of his country, walks, he doesn't even know where he's going. He's just following the lead. And God says, everywhere you walk, I'm going to give it to your descendants. Abraham never owned the only property that he owned was what he buried Sarah in, what he's later on buried in. You understand? But what's he doing? He's living by faith. What does he do when Isaac, God says, all right, my paraphrase, I promised this boy to you 75 years ago, basically, 25 years ago. And now, here he is, go sacrifice him. Well, how do I know that Abraham obeyed God? By what he did. He didn't do that to try to get the favor of God. He did that because God told him to. He already had the favor of God. And so by his corresponding action, we can see he's in faith. So it's not that faith doesn't do anything. Faith doesn't work to get there. Faith rests in a finished work and listens to what the finished work is saying. And then your actions are in agreement with Jesus. Then you're resting. You don't even have to think about it. He's already thought for you. Now, Adam was created in that state. Before Adam fell, the man and the woman there in the Garden of Eden, God planted the garden. But he gave him an assignment, take care of it. And he's just doing what God's telling him to do, name the animals. Whatever Adam called it, that's the name of the animal. right? He's just doing what God tells him to do, demonstrating his faith in God. He's resting in God. He's not making decisions independently of God until the fall. And then he becomes the judge of what should be done and what shouldn't be done. You understand? And that's where people live today. They're still partaking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They determine what's good and what's evil. And if you listen to the Spirit of God, you don't have to make those decisions. God's going to let you know what you need to be doing, and you won't be doing evil. If you follow the Spirit of God, you're not going to do evil. You follow me? So what are you doing? You're resting in His thinking, not in your thinking. In His ways, not in yours ways. My time's up, so I'm going to have to stop here. Okay? I hope that helps you get some clarity on some things.